All right, welcome guys to this live stream with Peter Schiff. It's amazing to have you here, Peter. We're very thankful for your time, and we're going to talk about a lot. We're going to, first of all, talk about Peter's background, his passion for economy, why Peter does what he does each and every single day, educating people about the US economy. Then we're also of course, going to talk about cryptocurrencies, going to talk about Bitcoin. I know, Peter, that you have some negative thoughts on Bitcoin. You've called Bitcoin, that Bitcoin is fool's gold, not digital gold. So it's going to be extremely interesting to learn more from you, and maybe you'll learn something from us as well. So first of all, I'm going to check so that the stream is working on my phone. Guys, please let us know if the sound is all right. And also, if you are excited, make sure to press that like button. Smash up the likes, guys. And first of all, Peter, how did you get interested in economics? What got you started? Was it in the childhood? What is the story with Peter Schiff?
Yeah, it is in the childhood because my father was very passionate about economics, and so he pretty much instilled that in me from a young age. He would always tell me stories, that were basically based on economics, and he would try to teach me economic principles from a young age. Obviously, my father was an Austrian economist, not a Keynesian, and so what I learned that type of economics from the very beginning. Even if my dad would take long car rides with me and my brother, I mean, we would talk a lot about economics and things like that. So it started when I was very, very young. And then obviously the interest that my father instilled just grew naturally with me as I got older and became interested in the science myself.
Mm-hmm. And so your father, I've heard that he was also very active within the space, and as you mentioned, he was the person that got you interested. So, what was his motivation? Why did he found it so interesting? What is the most important factor for his interest, would you say?
Well, I think he initially got interested in it because he was in the insurance business and he was selling, policies. And obviously, this was in the 1960s and 1970s that he really began his career. And that was a period of time where there was a lot of inflation. And obviously, inflation is an enemy of insurance products because they are promising to pay benefits in the future. And inflation is eroding away the value of those benefits. And I know he became very concerned when the government was going to go off the gold standard. He testified in front of the Senate Committee on Money and Banking in 1968. He was the only real one that was testifying against the removal of gold backing. And, at the time you had the Secretary of the Treasury, the Federal Reserve, that said that if we removed the gold backing, that the dollar would be stronger, that the price of gold would go down, that we would free up the dollar from being held down by gold, and that inflation would be lower and everything would be better if we can simply free the dollar from the gold standard. And my father argued the opposite, that if we went off the gold standard, that inflation would rise, that the price of gold would surge, and that it would be a big mistake, and that it would usher in bigger deficits and more government. And of course, my father was the only one that was right. I mean, the price of gold went from $350 to $850. Right? You had the Secretary of the Treasury and the Federal Reserve who said that the price of gold would actually go down. that being tied to the dollar was what was propping up the price of gold. It was actually the opposite. It was by tying the dollar to gold that gold was maintaining its value. Once they removed that backing, the value of the dollar plunged. And then you had the massive inflation of the 1970s. You had prices rising. You had the American standard of living falling.
Mm-hmm. And so one of the things that you're also known for is predicting the 2008 crash. And I saw these interviews with you on national television where you were telling people that this is not going to end well. And some of them were literally laughing in your face. And I encourage everyone who is watching to just Google Peter Schiff predicting the financial crash. So what kind of metrics did you use to predict that, and why didn't everyone else understand what you were saying?
I didn't use any metrics at all. I just used common sense. I just understood economics. The thing is, why did so many people not see a crisis that was so obviously staring them in the face? That is the problem. And a lot of it has to do with the nonsense that they learn in high school and universities about economics. but a lot of it has to do with perpetuating their own self-interest. I mean, the powers that be were benefiting from the bubbles and the profits that they were generating. Politicians were benefiting from the phony wealth that voters believed that they were accumulating. So nobody wanted this party to end. And so they were oblivious to the things that I had to say. And yes, they laughed at me. They couldn't understand anything. And then, of course, when I was right, I briefly had a little bit of a moment in the sun, but that quickly faded. And then pretty soon people just started saying, oh, Peter Schiff was lucky. He was a stop clock. He didn't really know what he was talking about. And of course, the crisis that we're heading for is even more obvious than the one we had in 2008. And the same people who were oblivious to it before don't see it coming now. It's the same reasons. It's the same cause. It's basically the same problem, just continuing to play out the way I said it would back even before the 2008 crisis. The only reason that people aren't laughing at me anymore is they won't let me on television anymore. So, I'm rarely on panels discussing the economy. So I think they're making sure that they don't give me all the footage that somebody might need to put together a similar video after the next crisis hits.
I understand. And so if you were to explain the problems of the US economy and maybe the global economy to a 5-year-old, what are the main reasons we're heading for a collapse, and why haven't we changed anything since the last one?
Well, I mean, I don't know, to a 5-year-old, I mean, I don't know, maybe it's because all we eat is ice cream and cupcakes, and, we don't eat anything healthy. I mean, basically, the problem is debt. The problem is excess consumption. The fact that we just continue to borrow money to buy imported products that we can never afford to repay with legitimate exports. Politicians continue to promise everything to voters so that they can keep getting reelected, but none of these promises can be kept, and the debts continue to pile up. The problem for the global economy is that they continue to finance the debts. They continue to loan money to Americans that Americans will never repay, and they continue to pretend that these worthless IOUs are legitimate assets. So you have an entire monetary system that is underpinned by a dollar that is ultimately going to collapse. And all these fiat currencies, rather than being backed by legitimate money, which would render them legitimate currencies, rather than backing currencies with gold, they back currencies with dollars, which themselves are backed by nothing. Although now currencies are also backed by euros, or they're backed by yen. But again, the same thing is those currencies have no underlying backing behind them either. But at least the European Union and Japan, produce products that the world wants to consume. I mean, America produces some products, but not nearly enough to cover the products that Americans import. And so that's why we have these skyrocketing trade deficits. Now we have skyrocketing budget deficits. And I think the day of reckoning is close at hand now for the United States.
But would you say that, is it fair to say the following, that although the products themselves, the physical products, aren't produced in the US, the intellectual property, the designs, the ideas, the blueprints are produced in the US, and then they're manufactured somewhere else? So would it be fair to say that this is the reason, because there's just a cost of labor difference and other factors?
Well, even if that is the case, we have to be able to pay for our deficits. We can't just say, well, we're doing all the brain work and we're going to let the rest of the world make everything. That's fine if we can cover the cost of what we import, but we can't. I mean, we're going deeper and deeper into debt every year. So it's a non-sustainable relationship. I mean, if we had, let's say, enough investment income, if America was still a creditor nation, which it's not, we're the world's biggest debtor nation, but if we were earning enough interest and dividends and rents off of our foreign assets to pay for the goods that we're importing, well, that would be sustainable. But the problem is, we're not doing that. We're just going deeper and deeper into debt so that we can buy depreciating consumer goods. And so we've got nothing to show for all the money we've borrowed except piles of debt that we can never repay. And right now, interest rates are still very low. Now they're starting to rise from these low levels. And as they get higher and higher, the problem is going to become bigger and bigger because as rates go up, the ability of America to service the enormity of the debt is going to be called into question. The real problem is if our creditors actually want their money back, right? The Federal Reserve is saying that they're going to shrink their balance sheet. What that means is they're going to let the bonds that they own mature. and not roll them over. And that means that the Federal Reserve has to find new buyers. But if foreign central banks make the same decision that they don't want to keep rolling over the paper that they own as it matures, then all of a sudden we have to repay the principal. It's not just about handling the interest payments. It's about repaying the principal of what we've borrowed. And that, of course, is completely impossible. But when the world wants its principal back, it's a Bernie Madoff moment, right? I mean, the Bernie Madoff Ponzi scheme was able to continue so long as Bernie's clients never wanted their money. But the minute his clients wanted some of their money back, the whole thing was exposed because Bernie didn't have it. Well, that's the same thing with the United States. If the people who own U.S. Treasuries want their money, we don't have it, at least not in any legitimate way. So the only way we can get it would be for the Federal Reserve to create it out of thin air. But that would mean that the dollar would completely implode. And so people would get their dollars back, but they wouldn't be able to buy very much with them.
Mm-hmm. And is it fair to say that not all debt is bad? Is there some kind of good debt? You mentioned that the US is the largest debt-taking country in the world. Is it only bad, or is it good and bad debt as well?
Well, yeah, I mean, it depends on what the debt is used for. So let's say I am a business and I borrow some money to make an investment in a piece of equipment that will increase the productivity of my workers. And I borrow that money, and let's say I pay a rate of interest of 6%, but it increases productivity such that my extra income maybe grows by 10% because I was able to borrow at 6%. That is positive debt because it's self-liquidating, because I can pay off the debt with the profits, the extra profits I earned by investing the money that I borrowed. And so eventually I pay off the debt and I still have a more productive workforce. So borrowing to make productive investments is an example of a good use of debt. And that is why we have savings. That is how savings grows an economy, because savings enables businesses to borrow to increase their productive capacity and increase productivity to increase the standard of living of everybody. But if you just go out and borrow money to buy something, a consumer good, if somebody just buys a television set on a credit card or takes out a loan to go on a ski vacation, that doesn't do anything to increase productivity. It doesn't do anything to create the ability to repay the debt. It simply is debt that has to be repaid by reduced future consumption. In other words, people want to indulge themselves now. I want to take my vacation now. I don't want to wait till I can afford it. I want to do it now. And so they borrow the money, but now they have to pay for their vacation, plus they have to pay the interest on the borrowed money. So the vacation ends up costing more. But the problem is, if you keep on piling up consumer debt, right, eventually you go bankrupt because you have no means to repay it. And that is what the United States is doing on a broader scale. We are borrowing to finance consumption. We are not borrowing to finance production. We are not making capital investments where we have real assets to show for the debt and a means of repaying it. We are just borrowing to consume, borrowing to have fun, to buy stuff that we can't afford. And therefore, there is no potential to ever repay these debts.
So seeing these problems and with your experience, with your knowledge, how does gold come into the picture? Why do you see gold as a solution, and how do you currently work with gold to solve these problems?
Well, I think the real problem behind the global economy is the fact that we're no longer using gold as money. Gold functions as money very well. You can use paper backed by gold, and that can function as money so long as governments are honest and don't create more paper than they have gold to back it up. But what we have now is just a pure fiat system where there is no real value in any money, right? So money is a form of barter where everybody is bartering one commodity. See, before money was invented, if people wanted to exchange, it was all barter. If I was a chair maker and I made chairs, and I wanted a couch, I had to find somebody who made couches who wanted one of my chairs, right? It was a very cumbersome way of exchanging, and it was very inefficient. But people discovered that, wait a minute, let's find a commodity that everybody wants, that everybody needs, and then let's like trade for that commodity. So if I make chairs, or if I want to buy a couch, I just sell my chairs to somebody who gives me gold, and then I take my gold and I buy my couch. So because gold, everybody wants gold, everybody can use gold, everybody desired it. It was a luxury good, but then it had these other properties that made it so unique to be used as money that other commodities simply didn't possess. So while gold was a very valuable commodity in its own right, it was the commodity most conducive to be used as money, right? And so that works. But what we have today, just paper that can be created out of thin air, so you have no long-term store of value, that it's not really a medium of deferred payment, because nobody knows what, if anything, a dollar is going to be worth in 50 years or 100 years. I mean, you know what gold's going to be worth in 50 years or 100 years, the same it was worth 100 years ago or 1,000 years ago. You have real relationships, but dollars come, fiat currencies come and go. They can be worth something today. They can be worth nothing tomorrow. Their value comes completely from faith in confidence that it will have value. But governments can easily undermine that confidence by going into debt and printing too much money. And history is replete of examples of hyperinflation where very valuable currencies have been reduced to worthless. So that is almost going to happen. But I advise people to own gold, because I do believe that gold will be remonetized, that this monetary experiment is going to end in failure, that the world is going to go back to the system that we were on prior to Nixon taking us off the gold standard in 1971. I think prior to Bretton Woods, what happened initially is the world was on a gold standard. And after the Second World War, the United States convinced the world to modify the gold standard by going on a dollar standard instead, based on the fact that not only was the dollar redeemable in gold, but the dollar was, not only was the dollar backed by gold, but it was redeemable in gold. If you had $35, the government would give you an ounce of gold. And so the U.S. made the argument, why hold gold? Just hold dollars. You can get interest on your dollars, and dollar is as good as gold because it's backed by gold. Meanwhile, America had all the gold anyway. We were so rich. We had exported so many products around the world that they paid us in gold. We had all the gold anyway. So, that was the system. I think we're going to go back to what existed pre-Bretton Woods, where each current country is going to back its currency by gold. They're not going to back their currency with somebody else's currency. They're going to back their currency with real money. But to do that, the price of gold is going to have to go much higher. Either that or the price of everything else is going to have to go much lower. And I think that's not, less likely to happen. It's easier just to revalue the price of gold. Where does it have to go? At this point, probably over $10,000. I don't know where, but it's going to be much higher than it is right now. And so, I encourage people to have some gold. I encourage people to have, some gold mining stocks as part of their portfolios.
And so this is also an argument that is made a lot in the cryptocurrency space, that currently the dollar is not backed by gold, it is backed by faith. There is no way to know how many dollars will be produced next year or 10 years from now. And so therefore you need to trust the government, you need to trust the central banks. And this is all across the world. So therefore we have this argument that instead we now, for the first time ever, have cryptocurrencies. We can transfer value over the internet, where I can copy something from, so before blockchain, before cryptocurrencies, if I gave you an email or I gave you some kind of text, you could copy it. Now, whenever I give you something, there's no way for me to replicate it to other people. There's no way to double spend. It is fixed supply. There is no way to just inflate the currency, so, for example, like you can do with dollars. And why aren't you convinced by these arguments? What is the main reason you don't see Bitcoin as digital gold and instead you call it fool's gold?
Yeah, and the arguments that that I have against Bitcoin, are the reason that I didn't buy it when I first heard about it. And ironically, had I not overthought it to that extent, had I simply just bought into it, I could be one of these Bitcoin billionaires by now, because I knew about it early enough in its life cycle that I could have put even not that much money into it, and assuming I hadn't sold, which is a big assumption. I don't know what I would have done with my Bitcoins had I bought them back then. But the reason that I didn't think that a Bitcoin was going to be a viable a solution or a form of digital gold, first of all, you say you can transfer value. what you're not transferring is value, it's the perception of value. I mean, because the Bitcoin itself doesn't have any useful value the way gold does. I mean, there are things that I can actually do with gold, even if it's not money. There are actually things that it can be used for. So if you just have a Bitcoin and you're not going to use it to exchange with somebody else, if it's, there's nothing you can do with it by yourself. I can do a lot with my gold that has nothing to do with anybody else. I can use it personally and do stuff with it. I can't do anything with my Bitcoin. Now, the idea of scarcity, right? Oh, Bitcoin is limited to 21 million, and it's scarce, just like gold. Yes, gold is scarce, but it's scarce, but it has properties that are desirable and that no other commodity can replicate. So the scarcity has value there because only gold is gold. Bitcoin is not scarce in that, yes, there's a limit on the number of Bitcoins that can be created, but there is no limit on the number of altcoins that can be created. So you can have an infinite supply of digital currencies that are identical in what they can do to Bitcoin. And in fact, a lot of the altcoins that have been created are actually superior to Bitcoin in their ease of use or the cost of use or the speed of the transactions. And so the supply there is endless. Also, Bitcoin itself has forked many times and just created new versions of itself. And the number of forks is unlimited, and the number of forks from the forks is unlimited. There is no barrier to entry. These cryptocurrencies can be created ad infinitum, and they have been, and they will be until the value implodes. I mean, eventually, the supply of cryptocurrencies, the inflation in the supply, right, of cryptocurrencies, the market is inflating dramatically. Eventually, it's going to overwhelm the demand for the cryptocurrencies, and the price will implode. Earlier on, there was more demand than there was supply, so the price went up. But the demand for most people was a function of their own greed. I mean, yes, there are some people that got into this thing early, free market, libertarian guys who, got into it for some of the reasons you're talking about. Yes, the monetary system doesn't work. There's no value, all this inflation, so this cryptocurrency is going to work. But the vast majority of people who have been buying in the last year, they never even heard of a fiat currency. They have no problem with the dollar. They're buying cryptocurrencies to accumulate more dollars. They want to get rich. They've heard stories of young kids who took their bar mitzvah money and now are millionaires, and they think they're going to do the same thing. Buying cryptocurrencies at 10,000, buying Bitcoin at 10,000. They think they're going to have the same profits that somebody made buying it at 10 cents or $10 or wherever they got it. So it's a very different ball game now. But this is not going to work. What I said from the beginning would work, assuming the governments would allow it, and they might not because it would work so well, would be a cryptocurrency that was backed by gold. Because currencies were initially issued by private banks. It wasn't governments. Private banks issued note currency, and the currency was backed by gold. So there is a history of privately created currency backed by real money. And so you could certainly do the same thing by a private party issuing a digital currency that was also backed by gold. In fact, that would work much better. I mean, that actually is more efficient. It's a better way to do it. But there is no history of anybody creating money out of thin air. Nobody just creating their own money. Creating currency backed by money, yes. But just creating something and proclaiming it money, taking value from nothing, that's never been tried before. Now, it's being tried now with these cryptocurrencies. But I think, as I said, I think it's gonna collapse because there's no way this is gonna work.
Mm-hmm. So there are some points I agree with. For example, the fact that many people today get in only for speculation, and therefore, in my view as well, in a few years we will see something similar to the dot-com bubble because there's just too much hype and too much speculation. However, there are some things I do not agree with as well. So, for example, when you're talking about utility, you say that there is no utility for Bitcoin. And the thing is, it might be the case that if you're living in the US or if you're living in Sweden, you don't really understand the point. I have my bank account, it works, it's so smooth anyway. But if you're living in Africa or in some other part of the world where there is just no banks and there's just you have no cards, you have no debit cards, no credit cards, then of course Bitcoin is extremely valuable to you if you want to do transactions to other countries. Another aspect of Bitcoin is that it is not only a currency, it is not only a means of exchange, it is also a global database. And for example, now we see notary services starting using the Bitcoin blockchain, this database that is Bitcoin. And for example, storing files there. So if I'm a musician and I invent a song, I want it to be copyrighted, I want to have the patent for it, well, I can put it on the blockchain, and then everyone will know, everyone can mathematically prove that I was the sole creator, I put it there first. So when it comes to utility, it is not only about money, it's not only about doing transactions, although that is huge in countries with hyperinflation, such as Venezuela, such as Belarus, where I'm from, such as Zimbabwe and others. And if you look at the prices in those countries for Bitcoin, they are a lot higher than the prices in the West, because there you actually have a huge demand for something that is not government money.
Here is the problem, though. In theory, what you're saying is people that live in very poor countries in Africa with very bad currencies, they could use Bitcoin. But you know, the transaction costs in Bitcoin are so high that it makes using Bitcoin as a medium of exchange in those countries impossible. You cannot buy something for $1 or $2 or $3 or $5 because transferring that small an amount of Bitcoin is just prohibitively expensive, number one. So it just really can't even be done. But also the volatility that exists and it is inherent in Bitcoin makes it impossible to actually price products or services in Bitcoin. So you always have to constantly convert them, you know, from Bitcoin to whatever a currency is in order to agree on an exchange. And you certainly can't do a deal where I'm going to buy something and pay for you in a month or pay for it in a year. You can't buy on credit. You can't make a loan denominated in Bitcoin because there's no way to know what kind of value the loan will be repaid in on either side. I mean, the borrower or the lender can't transact in it. But you know what people in Africa could actually do? See, this is the crazy part. They could actually, let's say, go to Gold Money, which is, you know, a company that allows you to buy gold on the internet, and they can give you a debit card, a free debit card that you can use, and now you can spend your gold. But if a lot of people in an African country, if all the people opened up accounts at Gold Money, they can all transact with each other in gold. They can all buy and sell directly in gold very quickly and very inexpensively. So people can actually get out of their local currency. They don't need a bank account. They can make deposits directly to their Gold Money account. And now they can transact with one another, paying for goods and services and receiving payments in grams of gold and bypassing the banking system, bypassing their local currencies, and without having to assume all the volatility inherent in Bitcoin, and with transaction costs that are a fraction of the cost of using Bitcoin. So gold is a real store of value. It's reliable. It's not volatile, and it's inexpensive to use. You know, Bitcoin is not reliable, not a store of value, highly volatile, and expensive to use. So it doesn't make any sense. I mean, when I first heard about, you know, Bitcoin, people were criticizing gold because they said, hey, gold is great, but I can't use gold to buy a cup of coffee, and I can use Bitcoin. Well, now you can use gold to buy a cup of coffee, but you can't use Bitcoin. So that whole argument is gone. You know, in fact, I remember one of the funny arguments people used to tell me initially about Bitcoin was, well, we don't like gold because they have futures contracts on gold. Gold can be manipulated. Bitcoin is better because there's no futures contract. Well, now those same people are saying, oh, you got to buy Bitcoin because now they have a futures contract. Now it's more legitimate. You know, and in fact, as Bitcoin gets more legitimate, its real use case is gone, because the main advantage that Bitcoin had was that in the financial industry, there was no more privacy. There was all this government regulation, anti-money laundering, know your customer. The cost of sending money was going up because banks were required to do all this compliance to satisfy governments who were trying to track all the flows of money. And so the real use case of Bitcoin was, hey, we can circumvent all that government. We can transact in privacy, and it's less expensive because we don't have to do all these regulations and comply with all this. But now, in order to mainstream gold, Bitcoin, in order to encourage the hedge funds and the big investors to get in, they had to change all that. They have to say, oh, no, we're regulated, we're transparent. This is not for transactions that you want to do in private. It's not for criminals. We're going to do all the things that the banks do. We're going to do KYC. You know, we're going to have people give us their passports, their utility bills. We're going to run credit checks. We're going to check their names against the database of money launderers or terrorists, and we're going to do all the same compliance that the banks were doing. And so now we're going to have the same costs, and it's going to be just as inconvenient. So you destroy the very
Right. So
initial basis for the use.
there are several points that we touched upon that you touched upon. Number one are transaction fees that currently you can't use them in poorer countries. And number two, volatility, that it is unusable because you don't know what the price is in the next hour. And you also talked about gold money as an alternative that actually works. So, of course, transaction fees in Bitcoin in particular, they are high, as you say. However, it is the nature of technology to get better. If you think about how internet was in the early days, you couldn't send an email, it was so slow, you could barely use the internet. And so of course people told this will never work, internet will never work. But suddenly it worked out and you could send emails. Then you wanted to send pictures. Once again, it was very slow, you couldn't do it. But then, so transaction fees are just a natural progression that will come down once the technology is up. And so another issue that is very important to point out, and why I don't really agree with you that gold money is a replacement, there is a valid replacement, is the following. Namely that Bitcoin is a trustless system. I don't have to trust anyone. There's no central bank. I don't need to trust you.
Don't you have to trust me. Don't you have to trust the miners? I mean, don't these guys get together and make decisions about what they're going to do? I mean, it's not that there's nobody there. And of course, a lot of people, in order to use their Bitcoins, end up going into an exchange. And don't you have to trust there? I mean, there's been Bitcoins that have been stolen, embezzled. I mean, you're still an element of something's got to be trusted, and then of course you have to have trust. You have to. The inevitable thing is you have to have trust that people will always value it. You have to have trust that people will always want it. You have to have faith. It's based on nothing but trust and faith, whereas gold is based on something tangible and real.
So first of all, when it comes to exchanges being hacked and so on and so forth, well, yes, if you store your coins on an exchange, you trust the exchange. But technically, Bitcoin is trustless when it comes to the fact that you can own your own coins. You own them.
But how do I use it? How do I use my coin? If I want to sell it for like dollars or euros, don't I have to go through some exchange to make that transaction?
Yeah, you can. You can use an exchange when you want to convert to other currencies or to dollars or to
So I have to trust the exchange.
To do transactions, to do conversions between Bitcoin and some random altcoins, yes, and that, or if you can find someone that can trade with you, you can technically do it without trusting. But the whole point I want to make is that I own my own Bitcoin. I hold it in my pocket, and then I can trade it maybe on an exchange, or if I find someone else that can trade with me, I can trade without an exchange. So in that sense,
but you still have to make a transaction, right, that is recorded and verified by some miners, right?
Yeah,
in order for
and that is something I can do without anyone. That is something I can do myself using my computer. So that is very important to realize that with gold money, you still have to trust gold money. I cannot have my gold with me all the time. And so there's where the issue comes in.
But that is always the case. But people have been entrusting their gold with third parties. And in the case of gold money, it's Brinks. You're trusting Brinks more than you're trusting gold money. But I mean, people have been storing gold with Brinks for well over 100 years, and Brinks hasn't lost any, and they haven't stolen any. But yeah, that's what banks were all about. I mean, so you're saying, this is something where you never have to worry that nothing can go wrong. You don't have to trust anybody. And I just don't see that that's the case. And I think it's the ultimate trust, because you're putting your trust or your faith in just an idea. I mean, you're talking about the fact that you think that the transaction costs of Bitcoin are going to go way down, just like the cost of, or email went down or whatever. Maybe it will, or maybe it won't. You don't know that that's going to happen. And of course, you don't know that the cheaper Bitcoin or a cheaper cryptocurrency might be one that's created by, that doesn't even exist yet. I mean, somebody could say, oh, look at EOS. EOS could be so much better than Bitcoin. And then somebody could invent something that's better than that coin that doesn't exist yet. And then, of course, there's always the possibility that if these cryptocurrencies actually worked the way so many people hope, that they just get outlawed, that the government then say, okay, we're just going to ban them. And then what happens? Now it's, back to just a small user group of people who don't mind breaking the law and who aren't afraid of massive penalties. I mean, they might have 10 years, 20 years in jail if you're caught with a cryptocurrency, or, they might put huge penalties on any bank or any company that knowingly transacts with anybody who's even related. even my bank, I have a bank right now, Euro Pacific Bank, and I get contacted by companies that are involved in the crypto space all the time because they're looking to open bank accounts. And I would love to take their bank accounts. I mean, I've got nothing wrong. I mean, I want the revenue, I want the income, but I have to turn down the business because I have to have other larger banks that will work with me. And they have told me if I have any accounts from any companies that are in cryptocurrency, they'll shut me down. They'll deny my access to the system, the banking system. And this is even without the government banning it. This is where it's okay. So, if I'm actually wrong and it works, the government's going to shut it down. The reason I don't think the government's going to have to shut it down is because it's not going to work. It's just going to collapse on its own.
Mm-hmm. So when it comes to hope about the technology getting improved, well, we already now see it improve dramatically. And with, for example, Segwit, Lightning Network, those are technical terms, but it basically means that transaction fees already in a year or two will be significantly lower. And also the transaction fees, we have to keep in mind that they're not based on the amount you send. So I can pay the same transaction fee and send $1 as I send 1 million or 10 million or 100 million.
Yes. I understand that. And yeah, obviously, if I want to move, if you have, two wealthy people that want to transfer a large quantity, I mean, you can certainly do that with Bitcoin. The risk that you run is, during the transfer process, it drops by 5 or 10%. So, I mean, yes, maybe I can transfer $1 million worth of Bitcoin cheaper than I can wire $1 million, but there's no risk. If I'm wiring somebody $1 million, I'm going to send them $1 million and they're going to get $1 million. We don't know how much value Bitcoin is going to lose unless the person receiving it doesn't care, right? If the person receiving it just wants the Bitcoin, it doesn't matter what it's worth, then I guess fine. But, in most cases, all the transactions are, in dollars. Like you have all these, situations where, somebody is selling a house for Bitcoin. Yeah, but they're not really selling the house for Bitcoin. They're just letting somebody use their Bitcoin to get the dollars that they need to buy the house. I mean, it's not that.
But exactly the same argument can be made about gold as well. And also, when it comes to volatility,
well, no, you can't because gold is yes, the price of gold can fluctuate slightly hour from hour.
Not the price, the fact that no one actually.
It's very non-volatile. I mean, if you actually look at the price of gold relative to currencies around the world, gold is one of the least volatile commodities that exists. Its value is relatively constant over time.
No, Pierre, I'm not talking about volatility. I'm talking about the fact that when you don't use gold for transactions, no one sells you a house for gold. And also about the volatility, it's all about the fact that Bitcoin and cryptocurrencies are such a small market. It's a small ship in an ocean, and of course, when a wave hits a small ship, you get a lot of movement. But when the market cap grows, I mean, right now we're under 500 million in the whole market cap for cryptocurrencies. So of course, if that grows over 1 trillion to 10 trillion, my view is that the volatility will decrease.
Yeah, well, we're worth about 400. It's about billion, not million. I think it's like 400 billion, 500 billion.
Yeah, billion, exactly.
Not million. But yeah, I've heard this argument all the time that as the price goes up, the volatility will decrease. But we haven't seen that yet. The price goes up and the volatility goes up too. So, again, you're accepting something on faith that eventually the volatility will go away if the price just gets high enough. But I just don't see that because, right now you still have a lot of people who are holding their Bitcoins and who are not cashing them in to buy things. But at the end of the day, no matter how much you love your Bitcoins, you don't just want to die with a pile of Bitcoins that you never spent, right? People want to buy things. They want to buy cars, they want to buy boats, they want to buy clothes, they want to travel. And when you have a lot of these people who have been holding on to their Bitcoins, a lot of young millennials who are still living in their parents' basements because they refuse to sell their Bitcoins, at some point they're going to want to actually buy stuff with them. And then of course they have to sell, and then, then the price has to go down unless they wait so long that the people who are selling them a new car, they actually want the Bitcoins for the car, and their workers are getting paid Bitcoins as their salary, and their landlord is accepting Bitcoins as rent. I mean, everybody would have to move to Bitcoin from fiat currency for that to happen. But I just do not see that is going to happen, that the cryptocurrencies are just going to supplant all the purchasing power that is currently embodied in the dollar, in the euro,
But
in
so
the yen.
couldn't the same argument be made about gold, that no one uses gold as a means of exchange currently? And in fact, when we're talking about the utility of gold
Yeah,
and
they
the price of
don't.
gold, the price of gold would be a lot lower if it was mainly about utility. In my view, it's also a lot about speculation, and a lot of the price of gold is because of speculation. And of course,
No, it's not. I mean, gold. I mean, if you look at, you could buy an ounce of gold. I mean, a Roman, right, 2000 BC, could buy a fine toga for an ounce of gold. That's basically what a good toga costs, an ounce of gold. Today, you can buy a suit for an ounce of gold. I mean, so the purchasing power is relatively consistent over time. I don't know where that music is coming from.
not here.
That is very consistent for gold. Gold today is not being used as money because people are mistakenly using pieces of paper as money. But gold could be used for money again, and I believe it will be. And when it is used for money again, I believe the price is going to go way up. I think the price of gold is going way up. And by the way, so is the price of a suit. All the prices are going to go up when all this inflation ultimately blows up. But what gold is being used for now, it's being used for other things. I mean, yes, there is a monetary component. Central banks are holding gold as part of their reserves. But if you look at their total ownership relative to historic positions, they own a very small amount of gold relative to what they normally have. So central banks are not buying as much gold as they have historically. I think they're going to do that in the future. But gold is being used for jewelry, right? Gold is being used in electronics. Gold is being used in medicine. Gold is being used in aerospace. I mean, gold is being used in a number of ways, and then it is being used as an investment. But it's not that if people stop using it as an investment, the value would plunge to zero. I'm not sure how much lower gold would go if nobody was using it as an investment. I mean, it would go a little bit lower, but as the price went down, more people would start using it for other purposes. I mean, one of the reasons that gold isn't used more is because it is so expensive. And so a lot of times people use lesser quality metals to do things that they would rather use gold for, but on a cost benefit analysis, they use silver, they use something else. But if gold was a bit cheaper, then they would use gold instead because it does things better. But, you know, Bitcoin ultimately can go to zero because there is no real buyer for Bitcoin. If nobody wants it, if people decide that it's not going to be the money of the future, or there's some other cryptocurrency that's way better, I guess there are a few people that still use, AOL dial-up, but, most people don't. Yes, the internet is still here, but people aren't using that. I mean, I hear people compare Bitcoin to the auto industry. Yeah, how many people are still driving around the Model T? People are still driving cars, but no one's buying a new Model T. I mean, because they have better cars, so that one's worthless. I mean, obviously, I guess if you bought a Model T and never used it, it has a collector's value because, most of them were used and junked. I don't know if there'll ever be a collector value associated with Bitcoin because all the Bitcoins that are created are never going to be destroyed. 99% of the Model Ts don't exist anymore. So there is some value there, but all the Bitcoins that were ever mined are never going away. So I doubt there'll ever be collector items.
Mm-hmm. So first of all, when it comes to the utility of gold, I mean, it's mostly used by people who hold gold for investment. I mean, you can use it for these things you say, the medicine and electronics and so on and so forth. But people who buy gold most often use it as a hedge, as an investment, and as a safe haven. And so I'm very interested to hear as well, how, in your view, are we going to use gold to solve the current issues we have with the financial system? Because I can't see it without having a trusted party such as gold money, without having a centralized system, and without it eventually transforming into something we currently have. Because as you mentioned, gold was already used as money before, and it didn't work out because then we had currency, and then now we have fiat currency. So what will be different next time?
No, it did work. I mean, the world has prospered on a gold standard. I mean, look at how well Great Britain did long before America became the world's predominant power. I mean, gold worked well for the Spanish. It worked well for the Dutch. I mean, gold has worked well ever since we've been using it as money. The problem is governments routinely, politicians debase the money. They try to create inflation. And, at least with gold, you actually have to debase it. You have to take base metals and put it in. Once they invented paper money, it became much easier to debase your currency because all you had to do is run it off a printing press. So it's that doesn't work. It's the fiat system that causes the booms and busts, and that is so destructive. Now, when you talk about gold and the fact that there are people using it today as a store of value, as a hedge, there are, but their number is very small compared to historical averages. I mean, far fewer people today own gold. If you went back 30, 40 years ago and looked at people's portfolios, much more people had gold as part of their portfolios than they do today. Far more people had mining stocks in their portfolios than they do today. So gold is barely being used. I said central banks have record low levels of gold. So gold has really been used mostly for other purposes because hardly anybody is using it as a store of value the way they historically have, because so many people are wrong. So many people don't understand the financial system and how this whole thing is going to end. And I believe that as more people wake up to the reality of what's coming, they will wake up and rediscover gold. And I think now you do have a lot of people who have, been buying these cryptocurrencies who should have been buying gold. I mean, they figured out some of the problems in the monetary system, and they thought that they should buy Bitcoin as digital gold. That's why I called it fool's gold. I mean, that's what, you had alchemists centuries ago who were claiming that they could create gold out of nothing, which is what the creators of Bitcoin thought they did. Hey, we replicated gold. It's got all the properties of gold. It's divisible. It's immalleable. It's scarce. I mean, we mine it. I mean, they tried to make Bitcoin as if it were gold, just like the alchemists, but it's not really gold. I mean, it doesn't have the essential properties that make gold gold and that made gold money. It's a fraud. It's a counterfeit of gold.
But so you mentioned the fact that...
Let me finish. I think that a lot of the people who bought cryptocurrencies will eventually be buying gold. I mean, but a lot of the people who bought cryptocurrencies more recently, I mean, they just bought them because they're just they're just greedy. They're just jumping on a bandwagon. So, who knows what they're ever going to do. But I do think that there are people who, bought cryptocurrencies for the right reasons. Their just reasoning was not sound. And the fact that they made money was more of just a good fortune. It was just that they were wrong in their assumptions, but the market rewarded them anyway, which happens all the time. I mean, look, there are a lot of .com stocks that went bankrupt that people made a lot of money on because they sold them before they crashed. The fact that they bought them believing they were going to be a successful company, they were wrong, right? They thought a company would work and it never worked, but other people made the same mistake. They had more fools that came in and paid a higher price, and they had the good sense to take a profit. They didn't let their own greed get the better of them, and they actually made money. But no, there were people that bought early in some of these .coms, rode them all the way up and rode them back down to zero. And, I think that will happen, unfortunately, with a lot of people that bought the cryptos. But, there's going to be some that cash out. And I've been telling people, too, all the way, look, even if you believe these things are going to keep on going, even if you believe Bitcoin is going to go to 1 million, you don't have to have all your Bitcoins. You can get rid of 90% of them. And if it goes to 1 million, the 10% you have left will be very valuable. In the meantime, you can extract a lot of value by selling most of the ones you have now to the people who are speculating, and then use it to, make real investments or just buy things that you want.
So Peter, I don't really agree with your argument about the Great Britain and older economies, because the fact is that, yes, it worked in the past, but as economies become more and more complex, as we need to use money on an everyday basis to do transactions internationally, to trade internationally, gold didn't really work out. And then we had banks, then we need to trust the bank so they have 100% backing for the currency. And then it went out of control and we had fiat. And so the question is, as I mentioned, why will it not repeat? We still have to trust the same structures and the same entities if we use gold. Another issue is, of course, this whole global economy aspect we're talking about. With cryptocurrencies, everyone is a part of the global economy. You only need the cell phone to start receiving and sending transactions internationally. Gold cannot do this without a trusted central party.
Yeah, but you have the free market. I mean, you have competition and you have private issuers. And again, it's not just gold money. Anybody, any company can issue a gold-backed currency, and people can do that. People can issue a cryptocurrency backed by gold, and those currencies can compete based on the trust of the counterparty, and people will look to preserve that trust. But look, there's no doubt in my mind that after this experiment fails and we, people get wiped out with inflation and we go back to a global gold standard. And I disagree with your idea that the complexity of the global economy means that a gold standard won't work. Look, the economy was much more complex in the 19th century than it was in the 9th century, yet gold worked just as well. And it would work just as well now. In fact, even better with the technology that we have today to make a gold standard even more efficient to implement than the technology that existed, hundreds of years ago. But I do believe that at some point in time, after the world gets on a sound monetary position again, and we have 50 or 100 years of prosperity, some idiot politician is going to make the same mistake, and the voters are going to make the same mistakes, and we're going to repeat the same failure. I mean, that's one thing that happens. I mean, man gets smarter. I mean, if you look at our technology, right, we keep making improvements. Each generation seems to build on the knowledge of a previous generation when it comes to science or mathematics or things like that. But when it comes to economics, everything that is, all the knowledge that is gained is lost. Every few generations have to start all over again, as if nothing has ever happened, as if the past never happened, and they have to make all the same mistakes that their great-great-great-grandparents made, who make all the same mistakes that their ancestors made too. I mean, this is just human nature. And I don't know, for all the advancements that mankind has made in science, human nature hasn't changed, right? Our greed, our fears. I mean, that's the same as when we were cavemen. And so, yes, I'm sure that you're going to see this repeat in the future, but that does not mean that Bitcoin or any of these other cryptocurrencies are going to solve that problem.
Mm-hmm. So to summarize, I think we agree on some points, we disagree on other points. To summarize, I think we disagree on the utility of Bitcoin. You see no utility at all. I see utility in the form of transactions globally, and also that you use Bitcoin as a database for other things, such as notary, such as patents. You need Bitcoin for that. It's global infrastructure.
Well, let me ask you one question though.
Absolutely.
Let's say you do see that there's some utility for Bitcoin.
Yes.
What is that utility worth?
That is what we're discovering currently. That is what we're discovering currently. How much is one Bitcoin worth? And that is also the million-dollar question, and nobody knows that. How can you price one Bitcoin? Because not many people know about Bitcoin yet.
Yeah, it's possible that the real value of Bitcoin, maybe it's $100. So maybe I'm wrong. Maybe it doesn't go to zero. Maybe its real value is $100. But that means that there's a tremendous amount of risk. Somebody pays $8,000 for it now. If it's ultimately worth $100, I mean, that is a big loss. Now, the people who paid $10 for their Bitcoins, I suppose if it ends up being worth 100, they still made 10 times their money.
So, and that is also the perspective.
That are paying a lot more than that.
That is, of course, yes. And that is the perspective I have, at least. I'm not interested in the speculation when I'm talking about the use case for Bitcoin and Bitcoin as a global infrastructure and Bitcoin helping people in poorer countries. I'm talking about the bigger concepts. But because there are only 21 million Bitcoin, well, of course, $100 for a Bitcoin might seem a lot or might seem not that much. It's all about perception, but there are only 21 million. And imagine if you had 1/21 million of the whole dollar.
Let's assume
economy.
that Bitcoin has some utility to provide a function, but so do all the other altcoins, or at least a certain percentage of those coins. And there could be more coins that are created. So Bitcoin doesn't have a monopoly on the market. You see, if Bitcoin was the only cryptocurrency, if it had something unique about it, some patent that prevented anybody else from creating another cryptocurrency, and if there really was a limit of 21 million that they couldn't create the forks and make the Bitcoin Cash and the Bitcoin Gold or whatever it is, then your argument would have more validity on its scarcity. And to the extent that it can perform a function and it's the only currency that can do it, and there's only 21 million, then you can make that argument. But if you're going to have to concede that Bitcoin is not doing anything proprietary, it's not doing anything that any other cryptocurrency couldn't do as good, if not better than Bitcoin, then to the extent that it has value, that value is diluted based on all the alternatives, all the competition that will be there in the future for other cryptocurrencies that can perform that same function.
All right. So yes, as you say, Bitcoin is open source. It is not proprietary. I can create my own Bitcoin, but it's all about network effect and all about fundamentals. And I agree with you in the following, that currently we see huge valuations for forks of Bitcoin that fundamentally are extremely weak. You mentioned, for example, Bitcoin Cash. Well, Bitcoin Cash is extremely centralized cryptocurrency. And looking at the fundamentals, I don't think you can really compare it with Bitcoin at all. But because market is so new, people are uneducated yet, they don't really see the difference. They only look at the marketing. It says Bitcoin and Bitcoin Cash, and they think it is the same but different flavor. But when it comes to fundamentals, yes, I can create my own cryptocurrency tomorrow, but when it comes to network effect, having the hash rate, having the miners mining, having the whole ecosystem, there's no way for me to do that. The same way as I can create a social network today, but there's no way for me to compete with Facebook, even though I have the technology.
Yes, but you know, we don't know in the future who's going to compete with Facebook. You know, before there was Facebook, there was MySpace. And you could have argued, well, I mean, they've got the networking effect. I mean, who can compete with MySpace because they were first, or they already have such a big social network. But then somebody comes along with something better. And, you know, I doubt that, as for all the value of Facebook, I don't think Facebook's going to be around in 100 years. I mean, I don't think it's going to be an enduring company that is going to be here, you know, like companies that still exist. You know, in fact, most of the big companies 100 years ago don't exist anymore. I think General Electric is still the only original Dow stock, and who knows, that one might be on its way out. Look at the hard time. That stock has been getting killed. It's at multi-year lows. So does Facebook really do something all that great? I mean, basically, it's an advertising platform. And so, yeah, it's all the rage now. But, you know, I just don't see that as being around forever. I think that, you know, it's not, you know, somebody else is going to come up with something. I mean, just even you can already see now the millennials. I mean, the younger kids don't even like Facebook because their grandparents are on it. I mean, so you can see that. You can see people are looking for alternatives. And obviously these young kids will get older and they'll have kids. So you know, but obviously Facebook is more substantial than just saying, you know, Bitcoin is going to be here in 100 years. I mean, I think that Facebook has a better chance of being here in 100 years than Bitcoin, but neither of them may be here. But gold will be here. I mean, I'm certain of that. I'm certain that 100 years from now, gold's going to be around, you know, and gold's going to be valuable and it's going to be desirable.
Mm-hmm. Well, the difference with Facebook is that Bitcoin is a protocol, just like the internet is a bunch of protocols, and then you build different things on top of it. Well, Bitcoin is the same thing. You build things on top of Bitcoin. And so in that sense, when it comes to protocols, you really want to build on the best protocol. And therefore, the network effect is much, much stronger when it comes to protocols. But
yeah, but you know, the other thing with the network effect, you have to be careful about, you know, it working against you, because, you know, you have a lot of people now that have bought Bitcoins and they're losing money, right? You know, people got excited and they got in, they paid $10,000, $12,000, $15,000, almost $20,000 to get a Bitcoin. And now the price is, you know, well under 10,000. It actually fell below 6,000 thus far. We have no idea, you know, how much further it's going. But I would venture to guess that on a numbers basis, the number of people who are losing money in Bitcoin outnumbers the number of people who are making money. Now, the people who are making money have made a lot more money than, you know, than what's been lost on paper so far. You have people that have made fortunes. And I think a lot of the people who bought Bitcoin didn't spend as much. I mean, they, you know, because obviously they couldn't even afford to buy but a fraction of a coin, given the high price. But I think numbers wise, you have a lot of people that are regretting their purchase. Now, still, maybe they think, okay, it'll come back. Maybe they bought a little more when it came down. But if the price keeps falling, and let's say the price goes below 2,000 or 1,000, I think you're going to have a PR problem that is going to be unsolvable. I think the enormity of the losses, the number of people who have lost, and that is going to bring in the politicians who are looking to pretend that they're out to help us. Oh, we need to have an investigation. This is horrible. We need more regulation. All these unsuspecting consumers lost all their money. We need to rein in. We need to, you know, regulation on this Bitcoins. We need to make sure. I mean, it's all going to come out. All the politicians are going to come out with the crocodile tears, and, and they're, oh, we need to save. This is why capitalism is so bad. I mean, greed, and people were ripped off, and it's all going to happen. And so that whole network effect is gonna work in reverse when the network is now poisoned. Where now you have so many people who don't like Bitcoin because of the money that they lost.
And speculation is, of course, a huge part of the market currently. Although when it comes to banning Bitcoin or taking some regulatory action, it is technically impossible. It is possible on a legal level, but if people still have a desire to use it, for example, if you live in a poor country where inflation is huge, you have hyperinflation, and also the situation is very bad in your economy, well, you still will use it because you need to feed your family. So in that sense, when it comes to technicalities,
if that is the case, there are better current cryptocurrencies now for that purpose. I mean, Bitcoin is now on everybody's radar. I mean, I've actually read stories now where if you're a criminal, you're actually implicating yourself by transacting in Bitcoin. That your digital fingerprints actually make it easier to catch you. So I think the criminal element, by and large, is already migrating to other coins. And so to the extent that you're right, and that it ends up being relegated to just a black market currency that's being used to launder money or evade the authorities, it could have value for that purpose. But what is the value? It's obviously going to be a lot lower than it is if the entire world's going to be using it for legitimate purposes. And which currency are they going to end up using? I would say that it's not going to be Bitcoin.
That is true. When you say that Bitcoin can be tracked, it can. Blockchain stores all the transactions. And in that sense, it might very well be the case that the governments realize that this technology can actually be used for their ends as well. Because it is easier, in my view, to track Bitcoin than to track cash. So in that sense, yes, then if you use Bitcoin, it might very well be a good thing for tax authorities to catch tax evaders, and so on and so forth.
Yeah, and it's even harder to track physical gold. I mean, if I just hand you a gold coin, I mean, the government can't track that either.
Yeah, but if I travel internationally, there's no way for me to bring it on a plane, and the whole physical properties of gold make it extremely hard to move.
I travel with gold a lot on the plane. I take coins, but of course you can travel. You can wear a gold watch. You can wear. There's a company that Gold Money just started called Minet, which they make all their gold out of 24 karat gold. So, you're just, if you buy a necklace and, jewelry, you're wearing your gold. And they already do that in places like India. I mean, people buy gold jewelry in India based on the weight of gold. It's not like they do in America where you pay $1,000 for a chain that has $100 worth of 14 karat, 18 karat gold in it. I mean, people buy gold chains. I mean, that's what gold chains were. They were a way to wear your wealth. And if you wanted to spend it, you would break off a link of the chain and you'd use it.
But that was very inconvenient, and that is why currencies were invented. And the whole handling of gold is, of course, inconvenient. I think we can agree on that. But guys,
but the inconvenience, you lose the value of inconvenience when you have massive inflation, or when you have government confiscation, or government, trying to do things that you don't want government to do. But yeah, that is the point, is that if Bitcoin is so easily trackable, then it no longer satisfies the original use case that people found in it when they thought that they were, transacting anonymously.
I would say the reason Bitcoin was founded not for anonymity as the first task for Bitcoin, but just to have a limited supply, to have a scarce currency on the internet.
But there's nothing wrong. Look, a lot of people want privacy. It doesn't exist anymore. Even the Swiss gave up their financial privacy. I mean, and that is valuable. And I don't think that it's just criminals that want to keep their finances private. I mean, I think that all people, honest people, don't want governments prying into their affairs. And even if you're not doing anything wrong, governments can take information that's completely innocent and use it to trump up a phony case against you. I mean, why do you want the government? Let's say you have money that's in your account and it came from a legitimate purpose, but the government doesn't know that. Maybe you don't have the records to prove how you got it, but you got it legitimately. But now they see these transactions and now they bring you into court and they force you to prove. I mean, the governments now, they catch you with cash, they just confiscate it, they seize it. with no court order, no due process. So it makes sense that people want to keep their affairs private. I mean, privacy used to be something that governments respected and that everybody wanted, but now privacy is a dirty word. Privacy is a four-letter word. You can't even, a bank can't even advertise that they have privacy. There is no privacy. The government can see everything that you're doing. And that's a bad thing. That loss of privacy is a loss of a right, a human right that we used to have, and now we don't. And so when Bitcoin came around with the promise of restoring some privacy, then that was part of its appeal, and to the extent that it doesn't have that anymore, or that it never did, then it's lost that appeal.
But doing private transactions with gold, as we mentioned, it is cumbersome to do internationally. I cannot have a suitcase with me, right? On the plane.
There is no privacy. You don't have any privacy with gold money either. I mean, that's true, right? The only way you have privacy is if you physically hand gold to somebody else, and then nobody can see the transaction. And so, I mean, and I can take gold and I can put it in a box and ship it, right? No one knows what's in there. I can stick a gold coin. Gold doesn't weigh very much, and I can transfer a lot of value in a small box and send it FedEx anywhere I want in the world. I mean, so it can be done. I mean, you take the risk that the package gets lost, but I mean, FedEx rarely loses packages. They're pretty reliable.
Guys, we have over 2,000 people watching. If you think this is interesting, share the stream, hit the like button. And now I want to talk about the future. So what is the future for gold in your view? And what is the future also for the US economy in the coming years?
Well, I mean, I think the US economy is headed for its day of reckoning. I think there is a major financial crash. I think 2008 was not the crisis. It was kind of the overture to this opera that's going to play out. And so, the fat lady is not sung. She's not even in the theater yet. So I do think that, we're going to see this thing through. I think that we're going to have a currency crisis and we're going to have a sovereign debt crisis. I think that's going to be very good for gold. Will it be good for cryptocurrencies? I don't know. Maybe cryptocurrencies will crash first, or maybe it may be a catalyst for another rally in cryptocurrencies. It's possible. I'm not going to say that that's not possible. But I do think that it will certainly happen with the price of gold. I think the price of gold is going to go a lot higher. And I think the monetary chaos that is going to be created by the demise of the dollar, I think is going to cause the world to really second guess the nature of the monetary system that they've been on. And I think some of the bigger countries, the creditor countries, the producers, the trade surplus countries are going to use gold as a monetary anchor. They're going to back their currencies by gold. They're going to increase the amount of gold that they are holding. And so therefore, I think the price of gold is going to go way up. And I think the people that buy gold now will be happy that they did. Do I tell people to put all their money into gold? No, because maybe I'm wrong. But in case I'm right, you should have some of your money in gold. In fact, even if I'm wrong, the price of gold is historically cheap. Inflation is coming back. The dollar is going down. Gold is going to have another cyclical run. Even if it doesn't get remonetized, it wasn't remonetized in 2011. That didn't stop the price from going to 1900. Gold went from under 300 in 2001 to 1900 in 2011. That was a huge run in 10 years. So I think we're going to have as big a run this time around, maybe bigger if I'm right about the gold remonetization. But even if I'm wrong, I think people make a lot of money. I think they can make a lot of money in gold mining stocks, and I think they can make money being invested in assets in countries that are going to see a increase in their standard of living and a revaluation of their currency relative to the dollar.
And there's also a case that can be made that cryptocurrencies will in fact see an increase if the traditional financial markets crash. Because, for example, if you look at Bitcoin, it has been going up when Brexit happened or when the Cyprus crisis happened. So there are certain correlations between the price of Bitcoin going up and negative events going down in the traditional economy.
I mean, I'm not going to dismiss that happened in the past, but I haven't seen that lately. I mean, there's been a lot of chaos recently, and true, you can argue that the price of gold hasn't gone up much in the last month, but the price of Bitcoin has imploded in the last month, even as stocks have gone down and bonds have gone down. And you could argue, people should be buying safe havens. Not only did they not buy Bitcoin, Bitcoin actually went down more than any stock market went down or any bond market went down. So I don't know how Bitcoin is going to react to a crisis in the future. It may fall, rather than rise. But I don't know for sure. I don't have a crystal ball. I'm not going to say that it's impossible. Look, Bitcoin already went to 20,000. So that doesn't mean it can't go to 40,000, right? I've said that, when it was at 10,000, I said, look, it can go to 20. And if it, I don't know how high it can go. But I would say that given the fact that it fell 70% from 20,000, given the massive hysteria that accompanied that peak, all the coverage, all the speculation, all the accounts being open, people taking out loans on their credit cards, people mortgaging their homes and throwing the money into cryptocurrencies, there is a good chance that we saw the end of the mania at 20,000. That is a reasonable probability. Is it a certainty? No. Is it a 50% probability? I'd say at least yes. And so to the extent that you have a lot of Bitcoin, you've got to realize the gamble that you are taking, right? With the money, the value that you have in there now. So you've got to ask yourself, if you own Bitcoins, am I okay losing all this money? Am I okay with that, right? If you answer that question, that you're okay with losing 100% of what you have, then maybe you don't have to sell. But if you're not okay with that, then sell your position down to the point where you are okay with losing what you have left. And I know people make the mistake of thinking, but if I sell and it goes way up, I won't have all these extra millions. That is the greed that has doomed everybody in every mania. You start to think about what a fool you're going to be if you sell too early. Well, the only people who make money in a bubble are the people who sell too early. You have to remember that. Even the people who sold their Bitcoin at 2,000, and you like to laugh at those people, oh, what a mistake they made because now it's so much higher. They sold too early. But believe me, the mistake is the people who never sell, because eventually the people who sold their Bitcoins at 2,000 are going to look smart. It doesn't matter that it went to 20,000. But maybe I'm wrong. Maybe you guys are right and it is going way up. So you know what? You'll still make a bunch of money if it goes way up, right? Because you would have pared back your position. And what do I suggest you do? Look, you can go to SchiffGold. You can buy some gold. You still have a hedge against inflation. You have a hedge against the dollar crashing. But I think you also have a hedge against Bitcoin and other cryptocurrencies crashing. Because I think when they do, that's just another reason that people will buy gold, right? When people stop buying fool's gold and digital gold and they want to buy real gold, then that's just going to increase the demand for gold.
It's all about the perspective as well.
Yeah.
Yes, it has crashed since 20,000, but if you look at the beginning of the year of 2017, it was under 1,000. So it's all about the perspective. And I agree with you with the fact that it's a lot of speculation and it's extremely high risk investment that you are dealing with. And this is an education that I'm trying to propagate as well, because we do see many people using credit, using money they do not have to invest in cryptocurrencies. Something else that I wanted to touch upon with you is the fact that when Trump was campaigning, it was a lot of talk about this big fat bubble, as he expressed himself. So is it getting better with the new administration compared to the old one when it comes to these problems you see in the economy?
No, that is very disappointing. I mean, Trump is now part of the swamp that he promised to drain. In fact, it's deeper than ever. As a candidate, Trump said a lot of good things. I mean, he didn't say everything right, but he said quite a number of good things, and some of that resonated. He didn't level with the public about the sacrifices that needed to be made to make America great again. He just felt everybody's pain, kind of the way Obama did, and promised to make it better. And, in feeling their pain, he pointed out how all the statistics were frauds, how the unemployment rate wasn't really as low as the government claimed, that it was much, much higher, that it was the biggest fraud in history. And he said the stock market was a big, fat, ugly bubble. And, he said that the Fed was, trying to prop it up for political reasons to benefit the Obama administration. All of that was true. But now that he's president, he's basically adopted the same strategy. Now all of a sudden he is perpetrating the fake job numbers and taking credit for them. He is, applauding and cheerleading the gains in the stock market and saying that's proof that he's a great president and that his policies are working. The deficit is exploding under Trump like never before. Trump is going to run bigger deficits than Obama did. The difference is Obama ran his deficits in the worst recession since the Great Depression, so you can at least make a Keynesian argument that the stimulus was necessary. Now, I don't buy Keynes, and I think the stimulus was destructive, but I know that there's a school of thought that believes that nonsense, but there is no school of thought that believes that you should run bigger deficits when the economy is supposedly booming. Yet that's exactly what we're doing. we're running even bigger deficits in good times than we ran in bad. And you have the Republicans, not only the party of tax cuts, but of bigger government. They are increasing government spending at the same time that they're reducing their revenue to pay for that spending. And they think they're just going to borrow the difference and that this is a good way to run a country. It is not. This is going to lead to a disaster. And the bond market is already smelling this. That is why it started to fall. And the stock market is noticing the bond market. And that is why the stock market is falling. And I believe that the party is over. And this is going to continue, until the Fed comes in and then politically decides to try to save the Trump administration by cutting rates and doing QE4. And that's it. That's going to cause a dollar crisis. And then we'll see what happens to cryptos by then if, they haven't crashed before then. But this is going to be horrible politically for the U.S. I've been warning that we're going to backlash. We have two parties in America now, much the way maybe a lot of Europe does. We have the Democratic Party, and the Democratic Party is the Republican Party. Donald Trump has turned the Republican Party into the Democratic Party. And then we have the Socialist Party, which used to be called the Democratic Party. But Bernie Sanders, who is the most popular Democrat, basically turned the Democratic Party into the Socialist Party. So those are the two choices that Americans are going to have: vote for the Democrats or vote for the Socialists. And I think they're going to pick the Socialists. And so it is going to be very bad because we know socialism doesn't work. And certainly what we've had previously hasn't worked either. I mean, it's not capitalism, but that's what the socialists are going to claim. And so it's going to be very dangerous politically for America. And that's just going to make the problems worse for the dollar, when the socialists control the White House and both houses of Congress in 2021.
So when we're talking about this collapse, are we talking about 5 years or even less in your view? How fast?
Look, I think it's happening. Look, it's long overdue. It's hard to put a time period because, to be honest, I'm surprised that we're having a conversation in 2018, 10 years after the financial crisis that I predicted years in advance happened, and we haven't had the dollar crisis. I would have thought it would have happened much sooner. So the fact that it has gone on this amount of time, it's hard for me to say with any degree of certainty, how much longer that it's going to go on. But nothing that can't go on forever will go on forever. All bubbles burst. It's just a question of when. And this is the biggest bubble the world has ever seen. It's going to deflate.
All right, guys, thank you so much for watching. It was amazing having you, Pierre, here as well. And I think it's important for us as a community to engage with different opinions and not live in a filter bubble. So thank you for a stimulating talk. We really enjoyed it. And we currently have 2,100 people watching. Yeah. So
I'm happy to do it. I'll just, so people don't know, I am recording this from a studio I have here in Puerto Rico, in Dorado, Puerto Rico. And we have recently been inundated by Bitcoiners. And I think the leader is Brock Pierce, and he came down. And I like to actually take credit for this because I think one of the guys who is one of his lieutenants, I think, who said that it was his idea, he found out about Puerto Rico by watching me talk about it on the Joe Rogan podcast. So we have a lot of people here who are going to make a Portopia or a Cryptopia here in Puerto Rico, and they're coming here to try to build a crypto community. And I welcome everybody to Puerto Rico. I mean, I came here myself for many reasons, and I'm happy to have the crypto community coming here as well. And hopefully, they bring more to the table than just what's going on with cryptos. And if it ends up that these things crash, that they can stay here in Puerto Rico and put their entrepreneurial skills to other uses to benefit themselves and the island here.
All right, guys. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you tomorrow. Have a great day and goodbye.